Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to NASCATV. We're excited to have you with us this afternoon. We've got a wonderful conversation ahead and are thrilled to have you all dialing in. As you're taking a moment to join us here, please make sure that you rename yourself. Please ensure that you have your name, your state, or your company that you're dialing in from so we'll know who's with us on today's call. If you have a second, also drop your information in the chat. We'd love for all on the call to connect with each other. We would love to connect with you from NASCA as well. Again, welcome in to today's conversation, another edition of our Emerging Issues National Webinars on Cybersecurity. I'm Pam Goins, Executive Director here at NASCA, and we're thrilled to have all of you with us today to have a conversation around this very, very important issue for state governments. We've got a wonderful panel who will be with us sharing their expertise and thought leadership. So again, we're thrilled to have you all with us. Again, welcome in. We are glad to have you today for NASCA's Emerging Issues webinar, NASCA TV looking at cybersecurity. As you're dialing in, let's go ahead and jump right into our first poll question to get a sense of where you are in your state or your company. So Tammy, if you would please bring up our first question here. We'd love for you to take a second and respond to this. So to protect and secure the data, which of the following does your state or company do to ensure data loss prevention? Now this is multiple choice. So you have an opportunity to select multiple answers here, but we would love to know, are you all looking at backing up your digital documents, implementing a two-factor authentication, training your staff, looking at risk management and assessments, security tools, antivirus software, and also looking at your mitigation and migration to the cloud computing environment? I see several folks have already responded. Again, no, this is a multiple choice answer, so take just another second to respond to what your state or company is doing to ensure data loss prevention. This is one of our topics we'll dig into today as we're thinking about employees in a remote or a hybrid situation and what it looks like for state governments and this mitigation process. All right, Tammy, will you show us our first results? All right, high numbers across the board. The lowest being backing up digital documents, but still 62% of you saying that you are doing so. 85% right down the middle, looking at training your teams, looking at risk management, and also those security tools and antivirus software. Great. All right, Tammy, let's take a look at our second poll question, if we can, for today. This one is looking at how you all are thinking about cyber threats. Are you seeing a substantial increase in those cyber threats over the past year, such as ransomware, digital identity verification fraud, marketplace scams, or real-time payment fraud? Three answers for you here. Yes, we're seeing that, and it really is at a higher number than we have in the past. No, we really haven't seen a significant increase. We're still seeing them, but not at a higher level, or we're pretty much at the same level that we have been since early 2021. Again, give you another few seconds to take a look at this in your state or company. When we're thinking about cyber threats over this past year, are you seeing higher numbers, fewer numbers, or maybe just about the same? All right, Tammy, we'll let you show us our results from the second poll. 67% say yes, we are seeing much higher numbers of those threats. Interesting. And only 11% saying we're at about the same pace as we were in early 2021. One more poll for you before we dig into today's conversation. With this one, let's think about the federal opportunities for grants and funding. Just curious, has your state applied for funds or grant dollars from IIJA, which is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, BLL, which is the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law? Same information called both ways. But then specifically wanting to know, are you looking at the state and local cybersecurity grant program, SLCGP? Yes, no, I'm not quite sure what we're doing here in our state. We'll give you again just another second or two to respond to that. All right, Tammy, what are we seeing on our poll results? A lot of insecurity, unsure folks on the call. 20% saying yes, we have, 10% no, but overwhelmingly 70% not quite sure what the state has done. There was a deadline that just passed, even as we speak, it's the 15th of November. So we're going to dig into that through our conversation today as well. All right, thank you all so much for responding to those polls. It's a great way for us to get started in today's conversation. We're thrilled to have you again to NASCA TV. This is an ongoing opportunity to meet with thought leaders who are members of NASCA, engage with other state and companies around the country around these issues that are really addressing components of state government operations across the board. So we're excited again to dig into today's conversation. And I want to introduce to you our wonderful lineup of panelists who will be with us here today. We have Phil Bates, who is the Chief Information Security Officer from the Department of Technology Services in the state of Utah. Laura Clark, who's the Chief Information Officer from the Department of Technology Management and Budget with the state of Michigan. Tyler Clark, who's the Manager of U.S. Government Affairs, Microsoft State and Local Government Industry. Dean Iacovelli, Director, the Secure Enterprise at Microsoft State and Local Government. Jessica Jones, who's the Director of Customer Success, Microsoft State and Local Government, and then also Samir Saini, Industry Director with Critical Infrastructure at Microsoft State and Local Government. So we're excited again to have all of our panelists here with us today. But before we get too far into our content, really want to set the stage with our two state speakers. So we'd love to open this up to both Phil and Laura, really talking about where we are with our workforce. And again, really before we dig into what's happening with the cybersecurity and the impact on our state governments, can each of you share a little bit about where your state is related to your workforce? Are you implementing a remote or a hybrid structure, or are you back in a government building?
Do you want me to start?
Let's go, Phil. Take off.
Okay. We got kind of a head start in this in Utah. In 2019, the governor started a remote work initiative, and the goal was to get at least 75% of the workforce doing partial remote work. Their main goals were primarily, we've got an air problem in some of our Wasatch Front areas where we're surrounded by mountains and get inversions. So that was one of the primary drivers, was getting air quality. But they also wanted jobs in our rural areas and to get opportunities into those areas where we didn't really have technology as an option through remote work. And then retaining talent. We were having a hard time competing with a lot of technology sector or industry that's coming here into Utah. So having that remote where they didn't have remote back then was a draw to the state. And we found productivity increased because we eliminated a lot of travel time for folks as they were coming to and from work. And then as we've gone since 2019 till now, we've tried to consolidate agencies into buildings and reduce our actual facilities footprint. So there's been some big savings there. But that kind of drove us into the pandemic where we went from this 50 to 75 to almost 100% remote work. And now we're kind of falling back into the program that was initially designed. And I think we'll have a hybrid there that kind of lands in somewhere between the beginning and the end of the pandemic.
Yeah. And Phil, there in Salt Lake City, you all have been very deliberate in your redesign of state government buildings there. I know a lot of hoteling space, a lot of community opportunities as well.
Yeah, the building I'm in is a brand new one, and there's about 12 state agencies that share this building. So you can get a driver's license, your car renewed, your criminal history checked, and all kinds of things in the same building.
Great, thank you. Laura, what's happening in Michigan?
So in Michigan, we also had a policy where we could do some remote work before the pandemic, but it was geared more towards employee satisfaction, flexibility, and kind of what Phil said about retaining existing talent. However, it wasn't widely used or widely spread. So we transitioned pretty quickly from where some staff maybe worked 1 or 2 days a month from home to, again, like most states, almost the entire workforce having to work 100% remote. We also, though, as we've started to normalize, what we're doing is our governor has asked, because basically when you're in state government, you have to support all of your residents as well as all the lines of businesses. So depending on what service you provide, there's a different customer interface and a different service model that you have to support. So the governor has allowed for each department to kind of decide what works best for their line of business. And so DTMB supplies administrative functions for those different governmental entities. And so we also are working to develop our model, our service model, to follow what our customers need. But as a standard, we are falling into a hybrid work environment where we're working a minimum of about 2 days a week and then 3 days remote.
Yeah, that's very, very helpful. And again, I think sets the stage for today's conversation. And like many of your colleagues around the country, there is still a heavy emphasis on remote or hybrid workforce situations, which again opens the door to more cyber threats and opportunities for some of those more sophisticated hackers to get into state government data. So Tyler, let me bring you into the conversation. I know you're working in the Midwest area with Microsoft. Tell us a little bit about the work that you all are doing at Microsoft, and then introduce your colleagues you have with us today.
Sure. Thank you so much. I'm Tyler Clark from Microsoft. I'm part of our U.S. Government Affairs industry team. I sit in Chicago and cover the Midwest, as well as work with our state and local government customers and our team nationally. I'm excited to bring some of our experts. My background, I worked for the state of Illinois as we led a consolidation of our IT infrastructure, was actually one of the agencies that was breached in the 2016 election. So I have a great deal of sympathy and respect for the people who deal with those issues and understand the challenges that this cybersecurity landscape has created and what's happening, and especially the work that you all have done to lead to a hybrid workforce. I'm going to have my colleagues, as they start up, introduce themselves at the beginning of their presentation, but I hope it's helpful information for all of you as you look at your roles as administrative officers and lead your states in this time with increasing cybersecurity threats. With that, I'm going to put up a short presentation. If someone can give me a thumbs up that they can see it. Perfect, great. And I'll let my colleagues introduce themselves as we go through here. And we're going to start with Dean Iacovelli. Dean.
Hi, can you hear me, first of all, before I go talking into the void? Awesome. So yeah, my name's Dean Iacovelli. I'm the director for Secure Enterprise for Microsoft State and Local. I've worked in State and Local exclusively for 17 years now. In a variety of different roles, including the first chief security advisor. And I currently manage a team of cybersecurity technical specialists that work with state and local government customers across the US. So I feel like I only have one slide. You're welcome. I feel like my role today is sort of twofold. Number one is try to describe the way, Microsoft is a major security services provider. We're also like almost a cybersecurity public utility with the digital defense report that you're going to hear about in a little bit. Given all the services we run, the telemetry that we pull in, the threat intelligence that we're able to gather, we have sort of an interesting perspective. And I feel with a combination of my state and local time and describing how the company is investing to get to where the puck is going. I'm Canadian, so I like to use hockey analogies. And so I'll just start there. So there's two parts to my slide here. There's a threat landscape piece, and that will be, I'll apologize in advance to any security practitioners on this call. You're living this pain. So this is really just review for anybody in that role. But I'm just trying to level set given the sort of diverse audience we have today. So if it feels like state and local governments are being disproportionately attacked, it's true. I'll explain why on the other half of the slide, or my theory as to why. But pick your report by industry. State and local government is most definitely being targeted. And that's not great. And the survey we did earlier shows that the volume of attacks is increasing, as well as it already being disproportionately targeting state and local. If you can advance the bullet. Sorry, Tyler, I made this a build slide. I'm sure that sucks for you. So as it happens, when March 2020 came around, or as we call it, the Great Exodus, when all government employees in the US went home, I happen to manage not only all the security specialists, but all the teams specialists as well. So on both sides, our teams, along with your teams, were burning the midnight oil 6, sometimes 7 days a week to get customers enabled for risk scenarios they had never really budgeted for or tried to avoid. So for example, one of the things that might be interesting about state and local is that there is still, if you look at hardware, a much greater continued reliance on desktop PCs for a lot of their workers. That's not great when your workers are all now home outside the castle and the moat and are working from home and probably didn't take that PC, that desktop PC with them. So now it's on IT to support these really unpleasant risk scenarios like, oh, from now on, I'm going to be working from my home PC, which IT doesn't manage, or God forbid, grandma's swampy PC. You remember grandma, the one who clicks yes on anything that says free. And that's a new risk scenario. And how do you envelop that in sort of an umbrella of security and risk management? That was hard to do when everybody went home all at once. And maybe as an all-up observation, and by the way, the teams people were overwhelmed for related reasons. In other words, everybody had to have a better, more robust work from home solution for collaboration. And so we saw Teams usage and deployment go through the roof in state and local government in that next couple of months. But maybe the most important delta that COVID imposed on state and local customers was a forced reevaluation of our essential approach to security in our organization. Because I'm generalizing here, but I don't think I'm lying if I say that a lot of people still put a lot of their eggs in the network perimeter security basket at that time. So it was all about firewalls and VPNs. And that model was turned on its head, because if you think about it, castle and moat, right? And I was basically using my firewall to delineate inside good, outside fire and brimstone. Now, what do you do when all your employees are now on the firewall and brimstone side? You kind of have to kind of reevaluate the overall approach. And we're not going to get to that solution today. Some people would tell you it's something that looks like what you may have heard of called zero trust over time. I'm not going to go down that road, but it was definitely an inflection point in terms of how we think about our approach. Okay, the next bullet, please. Obviously, the stakes are higher now. You've all seen the headlines, the pipeline, etc. Solar winds might have crossed your transom in terms of news, and that was more of a supply chain attack. A lot of these are from state-sponsored attackers, and who can often have nearly unlimited resources to get to what they want to, and that's kind of a new intensifying problem. Now, if I sort of half switch, if you want to go to the next one, to the resourcing slide, I put this one in across both because I think the reality of what's happening in cybersecurity attacks is driving or really amplifying the resourcing side of the problem for state and local customers. And what I mean by this is it's called industrialized cybercrime, meaning that you don't have to be a hacker to hack today. Basically, the barrier of entry, technically and financially, is almost zero. So there are specific operating system kits that you can download that are free that come with a full set of automated hacking tools, right? Near automated. There's also ransomware as a service now. There's phishing as a service. So you just tell them who you want to be attacked, pay a little bit of money, and then they're off to the races. And so to me, I look at that as attack industrialization and automation across the cyber attacker landscape. So on the resourcing slide, if we could go to the next one. This is from a National Association of State CIO report from a few years ago that compared percentage of total IT spend in commercial, federal, and state and local, and 28% in commercial, 16% in Fed, 2% at the states, and many not having no line item in the budget for cybersecurity, which to me is always a yellow flag. But that's just me. And so if you're a busy / lazy hacker, who are you going to go after? You're going to go after states, you're going to go after municipalities, especially small municipalities, because they're under-resourced for this fight. And by the way, when I say asymmetrical in the title of this slide, is because I think of cyber, the reason why it's so frustrating of an IT challenge, an organizational challenge, is that it's like terrorism. The resources required to defend far, far outweigh the resources required to attack. And that's just a perennial problem as we struggle to address this challenge. And so the spending situation doesn't help. Next point, please. I would say that for a variety of reasons, and especially in a more challenging world of hybrid work and securing everything, we only used to have to secure our own environment. Now we got to secure every scenario for every device, et cetera. And that's not easy. And so a lot of my customers find that they've ended up with too many tools, too much complexity, which leads to an inability to manage, and managing is super important to make any progress with cybersecurity. And they don't have enough skilled people to manage. And with, say, asymmetrical things, throwing bodies at the problem is not always an option, or you'll never have enough bodies. And the final point on this front is really, there's a people element to this that cannot be ignored. A lot of customers I talk to are very worried about the number of people they have to go tackle this problem, and maintaining the skill sets, and to an earlier point, retaining those people, those incredibly valuable and scarce cybersecurity people. And I sat in front of a governor one time who's very proud of the fact that he had funded 35 new cybersecurity heads for their state. That's an insanely huge number for most of my customers. But you talk to the CIO afterwards, and they were struggling to compete for talent in the industry to fill those heads, because there's a 3 million, decide your report, there was a 3 million job vacancy problem globally. And so cybersecurity talent's in high demand. You're competing with private sector. Guess how that goes? I mean, sometimes you're competing with me when I have an open head count. And so really, even if you thought you could throw bodies at the problem, that's proving to be challenging. And so finally, what we are seeing, and maybe you agree with me, maybe you don't, there's one more build, Tyler, is that, so we know potentially, and we're going to talk more about this after, that there's federal money coming to the states and the municipalities in those states. That provides what I call thrust. But what is the direction? In other words, you're not going to get enough money to boil the ocean and do everything security. So how do you prioritize your projects? Well, Microsoft would tell you that the way you will get the most wins and keep up in this race is by finding things in your security processes that you can automate. And that should be the ultimate punch list for how you prioritize your projects to most quickly improve your outcomes and keep up with what the attackers are doing. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Dean. Appreciate that. So let's bring Laura and Phil back into the conversation and really have you react to what you just heard from Dean. There are definitely cyber attacks. They are increasing, as we know. How is that happening? Let's start in Michigan. When you're thinking about your workforce being no longer in a state building, which may or may not have even been adequately secured at that point.
Yeah, so I think Dean summarized kind of the pain that I think as the chief security officer and the CIO, I've been feeling for the last couple of years. So it's I don't want to say it's good information, but it is at least validating that, we're on the right track with thinking through the problem sets and things. Michigan, we were already on kind of a trajectory to start looking at kind of the infrastructure in the way that we thought about security. Dean brought up the term zero trust. So Michigan has started to think about, what does zero trust mean for us, and how do we modernize? Like, I like to think, so zero trust kind of can be a little bit of a buzzword, but for me, from a technology standpoint, it's really, how do we modernize what we're doing from a technology standpoint to meet the current trends and the future trends that we're seeing. So we had already, before the pandemic, we had already done some pretty key things within our government. We had already rolled out MFA and had been requiring MFA for our employees and our systems. We also had done things like started enforcing data classification and labeling for all of our documents and things so that we could then start tracking where our information was going, who was accessing it, did they have the right privilege to do so, was it really? So kind of those first steps towards, that modernization of the security platform. We also, are centralized. We're highly centralized in the state of Michigan, which is different. I think Utah's similar to Michigan in that aspect. But what that does for us is because we have consolidation around our IT, we can actually manage the configurations and we can manage the security tools for all the executive branch through one platform in a uniformed sort of way versus having to go out to each individual agency and work through the problem sets there. So being centralized has helped us quite a bit. We also, have started to look and say, okay, what do we need to do for things like VPN for our edge? Because like Dean explained, the way I like to see it is we used to have this nice boundary, that perimeter around our buildings. Now, when I look at our security edge, it looks like an infinity pool, right? Like the edge of where my security is kind of is flowing off the side, and I'm not sure where it ends. But we're moving towards that hybrid, like we just said. So it's really important for us to be able to at least control and get towards idea of the right person from any location can access what they need and do their job, right? So we're really starting to focus on things like endpoint protections, looking at conditional access controls, and looking at things around not just network, but around people. Do they have the right access and are the right devices connecting at the right place?
Yeah, helpful, Laura. Bill, what's the landscape there in Utah? I'll have you unmute if you don't mind.
Yeah, just to validate some of that, in Utah, just over the past 5 years, we used to look at the block traffic that we see here in the state in the hundreds of millions. We're well into the 3 billion, 4 billion range now, just in a 4 to 5 year period. So the stuff that we see coming at us, it's not manual at all. Most of it's automated. So these groups that are after us, they have a high level of sophistication. They've got great tools and they've got a lot of capacity. So I think a lot of people underestimate the threat that we're up against. It's like a business out there. It's not anyone in their house just doing this part-time anymore. These are organized groups, they're structured and they're well-funded. So I think if you understand that, then you can kind of build your defense around that. The other thing that we've noticed here in Utah is that collapse of the castle. So, in the past, we had certain policies and rules around machines that we called mobile that would traverse outside that castle. And then we had different policies and rules around equipment that stayed inside the castle. And over the last 3 or 4 years, as this pandemic and our remote work is gone, we ended up with things that we thought were inside the castle moving outside that weren't properly configured or monitored or anything like that. So we treat devices as devices. So we're going more to we don't really care where you're positioned on the network. The controls look the same. One example is we encrypt everything now. Where in the past, if we thought that device was going to leave, we'd encrypt those, but the things inside typically wouldn't. No one ever thought 3 years ago that desktops would be taken home to a home environment, and that happened during the pandemic. So we've really had to make some adjustments in the way that we've written our policies, the way we do configurations, and that the biggest thing that we're working on now is as we get VPN access into our facilities, we need to know more about what that machine is. So we're putting in technologies in there that we can identify whether they're a state machine or they're a home machine. If they're a home machine, they need to get into something, maybe we push them into a virtual environment to make that happen. So those are kinds of the things we're working on right now is how do we protect from what could be out there in that home environment and kind of polish that off a little bit.
Yeah, and I feel that's the perfect segue into, what could be out there. So, Jessica, let's bring you in to think about the landscape. What is the threat landscape at this point? I know Microsoft has a new report that has just come out. Share a little bit about what you all are seeing.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And again, Jessica Jones, I'm the Director of Customer Success here at Microsoft. I've been at Microsoft for 2 years. And prior to that, I'm a former state CIO for the state of Arkansas. So this is, bringing back memories, I would say, for sure. So, here to talk to you about, what the threat landscape looks like today. And if I can start, I want to say that, at Microsoft, we have great responsibility to protect our customers and really work together with fellow defenders to make the world a safer place. This is why Microsoft has been dedicated to publishing its digital defense report since 2020. And you'll see the link to this report. It's going to be part of this deck. Definitely recommend everyone to take a look at the report, share it with your teams, with your IT organizations, with your CIO, with your CISOs. It's got great insights and also a great actionable items that you can take to your teams, and they can start, looking into what they can do next. You want to click on the next one, Tyler? Thank you. So, one thing that might surprise you is that, Microsoft is the largest security vendor in the world. We have over 8,500 people working in cybersecurity related matters, from our engineers, researchers, threat hunters, investigators, you name it. And we also work with a partner ecosystem of, more than 15,000 partners. As you can imagine, we serve billions of customers globally, which really allows us to aggregate security data from a broad and diverse spectrum of organizations and consumers. Today, we analyze 43 trillion security signals per day. So these signals allow us to understand the current state of cybersecurity, including those indicators that can help us predict what attackers are going to do next. This past year, as you can see on the screen, Microsoft Security blocked 37 billion phishing and other malicious emails, and more than 34 billion identity threats were blocked. Next. So what is it that we continue to see? And this is just to kind of reinforce what you've heard from Dean and from the CIOs as well. But as you can imagine, we continue to see that the techniques and the complexity of the attacks continue to evolve and really become more sophisticated. And ultimately, as I mentioned, cybercrime has become a very lucrative career. And unfortunately, we're seeing more and more participants. At Microsoft, we've been tracking the trend of cybercrime as a service, just, like Dean mentioned. So as, he mentioned cyber criminals today, they'll learn that they can sell or rent their services to others. And this is what created, the as a service type of model. So unfortunately, now your average cyber criminal, as Dean mentioned, they no longer have to develop their own tools. They can just simply go to the dark web, buy those cybercrime kits and, services, incorporate those into their campaigns. So this takes me to talk a little bit about ransomware attacks. Again, continue to evolve, very sophisticated, and continue to pose an increased danger to organizations because now they're leveraging a growing cyber criminal ecosystem. So you may wonder what that cyber criminal ecosystem looks like. So we're talking about what we're calling now as ransomware gangs, right? I mean, these are separate entities. We have those access brokers that break in and handle the access. We have malware developers that sell the tooling. We have criminal operators that conduct the intrusions. And then we have, of course, encryption and extortion services providers. Next. And just real quick to touch on, the phishing threat that we're seeing. Again, this year, significant increase in phishing and credential theft attacks. The volume of password attacks, is risen. We have about 921 attacks every second. And as you can see on the screen, this year, we blocked an average of 710 million phishing emails per week. Let me click on next, please. All right, so, some of the insights from our frontline responder teams is that there are three main contributing factors to ransomware attacks. One, weak identity controls. Unfortunately, the majority of those organizations did not have multi-factor authentication implemented, especially for sensitive and high privilege accounts. Which allow the attackers to start moving laterally within their networks. And then, about ineffective security operations, about 68% of impacted organizations did not have an effective vulnerability and patch management process. And about 76% of those organizations lack an effective response plan. And of course, lack of data protection and strategy. Almost half of the organizations did not have backup and recovery plans for critical assets. And almost all the organizations, about 92% of impacted organizations, did not implement effective data loss prevention controls. Next. So as these threats increase and evolve, of course, it's critical for organizations and governments to improve their cyber resilience. And how do we go about it? How do we improve our cyber resilience? And the answer is basic cybersecurity hygiene, right? It still protects against 98% of the attacks. And, some of the 5 things that, every organization should adopt for better resilience. And this, by no means, this is all they should do. This is at a minimum what organizations need to do. And they are not in a particular order. And you heard it from, from our panelists a little while ago to mention enable multi-factor authentication. This is to protect against compromised user passwords and really provides you with an extra resilience for identity. So hopefully everybody here, today on our call, you're currently using multi-factor authentication within your agency. And, if you think about it, this is when you use 2 or more authentication methods to verify your identity. The other one is, as Laura mentioned, apply zero trust principles. And when you hear the term about zero trust, it's all about a framework. It's all about principles. This is about ensuring that each account only has access to the systems that they really need. It's all about continuous verification, always verify access all the time for all the resources. And the goal for that is to really and truly minimize impact if an external or an insider breach does occur. The next, of course, implementing software to detect and automatically block attacks, your endpoint detection and response type of technology. And of course, ensuring that all your systems are kept up to date. So ensuring that all your devices, applications, and infrastructure are up to date, ensuring that they have the latest patches and updates from the manufacturer. Unfortunately, the on-patch and out-of-date systems are one of the key reasons many organizations fall victim of an attack. And lastly, protect your data, knowing where your most critical data is, where it's located, how it's been secure, and ensuring that the right security systems are implemented. So just to kind of close, and like I said, as a former CIO and as I experienced some of the incidents during my tenure, I can tell you that, unfortunately there were, it had to deal with basic cybersecurity hygiene. And, as I think through all this, I can say that, our legacy systems, manual processes still continue to present a risk to organizations. So as leaders, I think it's important that you work with your security teams to understand how your data and your mission critical applications are being secure. Understand where your risk is. And if you haven't done it yet, I would recommend to do a cybersecurity risk assessment. During my tenure, we did a cybersecurity risk assessment. We did it for the entire executive branch. And it was really eye-opening because we could see, we had our score and we could see a list of risks that we had. And we also had we could see where the critical risks are and, what the impact of that risk, if it was low, medium, or high. So it allowed us to really prioritize what risk we really needed to mitigate. And it also helped tremendously to go with our stakeholders, right? To be able to have those talking points, right? To go and get some funding and make some investment to mitigate those risks. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica. Wow, there's a lot of staggering statistics there, but especially the one about 710 million phishing emails every single week. That is astounding. So Phil, let me bring you back into the conversation and think a little bit about what you're doing there in Utah. What some of the strategies you all are using around this threat landscape, and then what are you potentially seeing that's impacting the work you all are doing?
In Utah, we had a breach back in 2012. And as a result of that, the legislature mandates that we do a cybersecurity assessment with a third party every 2 years. So we've been able to use that, and it's really helped us identify where our holes are. And because the legislature's mandated it, they feel obligated to fund some of the activities to reduce the risk identified by that. So that whole strategy has worked real well for us over the years. when that breach occurred, I think we had a chief security person and 2 folks that worked for him doing cybersecurity awareness training. We've gone from that to well over 35, 40 dedicated people now just doing cybersecurity. So that kind of woke them up and they got behind it. But having that assessment there keeps this front and center with the legislature every 2 years and gives us an opportunity to address that funding need and really takes us a long ways down the road.
Thank you. Laura, what about in Michigan?
Yeah, so another staggering statistic just from Michigan. So our tooling and our SOC actually blocks over 90 million potentially malicious intrusions every day. So that's the type of landscape or the type of fight that we're fighting. I've heard several cybersecurity leaders and experts say, you know, it's really hard because at the state or local governmental level, we have to make sure we're right 100% of the time and we're blocking 100% of those attempts. Actually, for the cyber criminals, they only have to, they can make many mistakes and they only need to be right once in order to be able to cause some pretty big damage. So that's kind of, you know, just to phrase or to just kind of scope out what we're dealing with here on a daily basis. We too, you know, are doing a lot around the hygiene and the cybersecurity awareness because we have a layered approach here. We have several different things that we're trying to block things before they get in. We're trying to detect things once they're in, all of those kinds of things. But our employees are also really critical for us. So we're doing obviously the cybersecurity awareness training and program, talking to our employees about don't click, you know, all of that kind of stuff. We're also trying to link it a little bit to their personal lives because we feel like if we can help them be better cyber practitioners at home and really they listen to us when we talk about how do you protect your family, how do you protect your friends, how do you protect your community, if they start thinking about it that way, they will do better, have better practices in the workplace as well. So trying to connect those different things with the individual employee, I think is really important. And then finally, I think just, you know, making sure the conversation is continuous with your leadership. So like Phil said, having that conversation with your legislator on a regular basis about what's going on, being open and honest without exposing maybe a vulnerability, but talking about where we need to continually make improvements, because we all know cybersecurity isn't a project. It doesn't have a clear starting and an ending. It's a continuous evolution that we're on. And so we need to not say, well, we were good yesterday, therefore we don't need to continue to fund it, right? Like we need to continue to bring up, you know, the changing of the landscape. We need to talk about the headlines that are in the media so that we can relate that back into the decision makers that help decide where the funding goes to, decide how many people we can hire and all those kinds of things. So, you know, that's kind of, I think, an important thing from a leader at our level is to ensure that continuous conversation, to make sure that the support for what your team and what your organization needs continues to be prioritized when those decisions need to be made.
Thank you, Laura. I appreciate you all sharing what's happening in each of your states. And you did bring up the fact that, you know, it does require funding, and this is definitely something that's ongoing. There's no start and stop time period. So Samir, let's bring you in to share a little bit about what's happening with the state and local cybersecurity grant funding, maybe where states are and what they might look forward to in the future.
For sure. Hello, all. Samir Stani. So I'm the industry director supporting state and local government critical infrastructure. About 2 years with Microsoft, but before Microsoft, spent about a decade in local government CIO roles. So all too familiar, right, with the cybersecurity challenges that CIOs are dealing with, the threat landscape, and what CIOs are doing to really address the challenge. And really happy to hear from Laura and others on the processes and tools, right, that you're enacting. That's really leading the way for sure. For today, I want to talk about how the federal government is supporting state and local governments with strengthening cyber posture through programs that are within the IIJA, or the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, otherwise known as the bill, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. one of the largest and most visible programs within IIJA that dedicates funds specifically to strengthen the cyber posture for state and local governments is the SCLGP. And actually, I was glad to see in the polling question that there's many of you that are just not sure about this program, so I can bring some clarity around what exactly this program is. So the SCLGP it's a $1 billion grant over 4 years, with $185 million that's being made available this fiscal year to support state and local governments with mitigating their cyber risks. Now, it's important to note that again, this is a 4-year grant program, and there is a significant spike in funding availability within this program in FY23 and FY24 that's bringing $400 million and $300 million respectively. So this is $1 billion over 4 years, a whole lot of money. Now, for this grant, FEMA has designated the state administrative agencies, or SAAs, as being the eligible agency within the state to submit a grant application for the SCLGP Notice of Funding Opportunity. Now, the SAA must establish a cybersecurity planning committee that develops a cybersecurity plan. And in that plan, it should contain sort of a summary of what the cybersecurity goals and objectives are, metrics around that, an understanding of what the current maturity level is across 16 defined security controls. And by the way, many of those security controls that are defined in this grant are directly aligned to NIST-based cybersecurity framework. And also the projects that require funding, how much you need, and how those projects align to the 16 security controls. Now, with respect to funding allocation, once the SAA submits their application and receives funding, which by the way is actually due today, however, we are aware that several states have actually requested extensions so that they could spend more time with their planning committee to submit their cybersecurity plan. But the way this works is 20% of the money that's directed to the SAA can be used directly by the state, and 80% of the funding actually must be used to support local entities. So from a local entity support perspective, what we're learning from states is that they're adopting sort of a variety of strategies to help the locals out. Some states are taking a whole of state approach, which is really like leveraging the funds to provide various sort of cybersecurity shared services like cybersecurity awareness training or incident response. Other states are taking a different direction, and they're planning to direct the funds, the 80% of the funds, to the local agencies that really need it the most, that have the highest cyber risk, that have the highest funding need. And then there's other states that are kind of taking a hybrid approach, right? Some whole of state shared services, and then also directing some funds to, directly to locals that need it the most. I think the punchline here is no matter how a state chooses to use the funds from this grant, the ultimate goal of the program is really just to break down the barriers between state and local government, recognizing that mitigating cybersecurity risks is really everyone's challenge, and encouraging collaboration between state and local agencies to share strategies and resources and tools to strengthen overall cyber postures is really the end goal for this grant. So hopefully with this information, you know a little more, right, about the SCLGP. If you haven't submitted your grant application, again, the deadline was today. You may have requested an extension, but then you have more time. If you missed this round, there's always next year, and again next year. It's a larger sum of money, $400 million. So definitely keep your eye on this grant. It's a very significant one, and I think a pretty big deal, both for the state and for the locals within your state. Now, moving on to the second slide. Now, outside of the SCLGP, there are several other IIJA, both formula and competitive grant programs that I wanted to bring attention to all of you around. I want to highlight 3 of them in particular. The first one is a grant program that's being issued by the Department of Energy called the RMUC grant. So that stands for Rural and Municipal Utility Cybersecurity Grant. This is a $250 million grant. The notice of funding opportunity is going to be released in Q1 of next year. And this program is specifically around directing funds for power utilities to help them strengthen their cyber posture. And from a state perspective, where within your states there are state-owned power utilities, those entities would be eligible to submit an application for this NOFO. So definitely keep your eye on the RMUC grant. It's going to release in Q1, which is really just around the corner. The next grant I want to talk about is a grant being released by the USDOT. There's actually two grants, and they're formula-based grants. So this is direct money from the USDOT to state entities. The first one is the NHPP. So the NHPP is a $29 billion grant for really directed to state DOTs. And within the NHPP, of course, the money is going to be used for modernizing transportation infrastructure, for implementing intelligent transportation systems, but it specifically notes within the language of this formula grant that these funds can be used for, quote, protecting the national highway system from cyber threats. So within this grant, you can absolutely use these funds for cybersecurity tools, services, right, and solutions to strengthen your cyber posture. And the other one is the STBG, which is the State Transportation Block Grant. This is a $14 billion grant that's being directed to states, and it's similar to the NHPP in that when you look at the language of the STBG, it specifically states that there's an eligible use of the funds to include, quote, measures to protect an eligible transportation facility from cybersecurity threats. So the long story short is I'm just sharing three grants of several hundred, right, within IIJA. And when you really examine the language of many of these grants, you'll notice that there is often eligibility for cybersecurity, and that all too often I think becomes overlooked because these grants, which actually existed prior to IIJA, typically weren't looked at from a cybersecurity lens. In many cases, IIJA actually amended many of these formula grants to add eligibility for use of funds for cybersecurity. So the takeaway here is absolutely keep an eye on these grants, keep an eye on other grants that are being released, and look at the language of the grants, because cybersecurity often is included and is an acceptable and eligible use to strengthen your cyber posture. I just want to end with how we can help. We published a cybersecurity technical reference guidebook that's available to all of you to sort of better understand the NIST-based cybersecurity controls and what they are and solutions that can help you manage them. We're also offering a product agnostic, no cost NIST-based cybersecurity assessment service. We just talked about assessments being a pretty big deal. We're offering that service. It's a sort of multi-week engagement, help you understand what your cybersecurity control gaps are, inventory your security tools and how they align to the NIST controls, a TCO analysis, and then recommendations. So that's also another offering that we can provide. So that's all I have.
Thanks, Samir. I really appreciate that. So let's bring Lauren Phil back in again to maybe share a little bit about your experiences with grant programs. And we've also had a question from our audience. If you want to share a little bit about this at the same time, are you implementing any particular strategies with your vendors when you're looking at security? So Laura, we'll kick off with you.
Sure. So in Michigan, we have applied for our SLCGP. We did do, as Samir identified several states, we did do an extension. We think that it's very important for us to be very planful. We don't get an opportunity very often for the amount of money that we're going to have to be able to impact cybersecurity across the whole ecosystem within the state of Michigan, not just our state government. So we want to ensure that we have enough time to work with our local entities as defined in the grant, so that we can ensure that we're building out the services. We feel we're going to have a hybrid model where we will do some probably shared services and then some where there may be some funding that's re-granted down into the local agencies to help build out some cyber posture. One of the things that we need to focus on, though, is figuring out where we are as a state and where our gaps are, so that we can build those shared services and provide the funding to the areas that help fill those gaps. And that we want to ensure that we're building services that our local agencies and entities actually are mature enough, first of all, to consume and are interested in consuming from the state level. So there's a lot of things to do over the next year to really get that comprehensive plan so that we're really set up for phase 2 or for next year's funding request, so that we feel like we're marching exactly where the state of Michigan needs to go. And like I said, not just the state from a government standpoint, but from all of the entities. Now, from the question asked by the audience, so we are working with our vendors. We have several requirements. The state of Michigan has some standard terms and conditions that we have around security and our security policies that we build into all our contract language. So we are working on that. We're also looking at third-party management procedures and processes to help us evaluate kind of those third-party sort of services that we procure, as well as we're starting to look at what the software, the secured software processes are for anybody who's developing code for us. What does that mean, and how do we do the software scanning and ensure that there are any vulnerabilities and things in the code that we're actually working with and deploying. So, all right, I think Phil, you can take it.
Real similar here in Utah. We were lucky enough to have the legislature create the commission for us last legislative session. So they've been doing a lot of the heavy lifting on this. We've engaged with the third-party contractor to come in and do a gap assessment. We've got security strategic plans for executive branch and individual entities, but nothing statewide. So they're going into all of the cities, counties, and local jurisdictions and pulling those plans to see where the gaps are and give us a statewide strategy at the end of this. So that hopefully will be done in March. So we've applied for an extension until March when we have that plan done. It'd probably be silly for us to spend money before we actually have that plan and the recommendations forward. So one big concern we're getting out of everybody in this is there's a matching dollar amount. So those entities that need it the most may not be able to get this because there is a requirement. First year is 10%, it goes to 20 in year 2, 30 in year 3, 40 in year 4. So getting that match so that our most needy can utilize these funds, I think, is something that we're really primarily focused on. And then the other realization is for about every dollar you spend, you're going to have 30 to 40 cents of ongoing costs. So where's that coming from? Because I don't see this threat going away in 4 years. So that's the big effort we've got right now, is working with our legislature and a more holistic funding approach across the board. How do we do this long term? Because this is not going to get easier. And that's going to be our big battle is where do we get the funding? How do we distribute that funding and where we go forward? For the question, we're real similar. We've got terms and conditions that lay down requirements for these vendors. And then we have a process in place to manage the contract, and they're putting some effort in that to make that more robust right now. So real similar.
Great. Thank you all. What a wonderful conversation it's been. I think we've definitely learned a lot today, but also have a lot more questions. So please reach out to your colleagues, reach out to your corporate partners who are members as NASCA as well, to really bring their thought leadership to the conversation. So let me thank all of our panelists today, Phil, Laura, Dean, Jessica, Samir, and Tyler. Really appreciate all the work that you've been bringing to today's conversation. Our next event around emerging issues will be for electric vehicle infrastructure. We'll be together on January 18th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for that conversation around the next emerging issue. Again, thank you so much for joining us here at NASCA TV. This recording will be up on our Knowledge Center in the next few days. Please share this with all of your team members as well. Thanks again to all of our panelists for being here, and you all have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. We'll see you soon.